Hello, everyone. As you want to go say a few words, Lynn?
I'll just say hello and um,
All right.
welcome. And it feels like the summer now. And happy dependence, independence, and interdependence. and
Day.
day. Yes.
Let's put the D and make it alliterated.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Independence, dependence, day.
Day. And we're so happy to have Charles with us. I always enjoy your reflections,
Thank
your
you.
way of helping us have discussion and deepen a conversation. And it's so good to see everybody. It feels like I'm in a different world here in the northern Catskills, and that all of you came here sort of miraculously from this other world in New York, and
We
are
get to be
meeting me
with you out
here.
there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So good morning.
I thought it would be nice to do something very simple as a starter, which is to become aware of our breathing and let our breathing take us to our aliveness, sensing our aliveness, noticing where we find it, and sensing something like, ah, this is me here now in this group, noticing what that's like, and studying with a small group, Dean's commentary on Aristotle. And Aristotle believed that every living thing has a soul. The Greek word was psyche, but psyche meant more in Greek than it does for us, had a broader meaning. And it's been translated as anima in Latin or soul in English. Well, let's sense our soul, and our soul is connected intimately with our breath, with being alive. And I want to begin with asking the question, what is independence? Of course, tomorrow we celebrate the signing of a declaration of independence. And some say that that act of declaring independence was the birth of our nation. So it's connected with birth in a sense. But I think if we can go a little deeper, probe a little deeper into what independence is. I love a statement that Marshall Rosenberg used to say, that he didn't want to be either submissive or rebellious. Obviously, being submissive is not being independent. But being rebellious and just reacting and being in reaction to something that we're opposed to is not in itself an achievement of independence either. Because we're a person who's still battling their parents forever, or is always saying no to everything, is not truly free. When we're free, we say yes, and sometimes we say no. Well, where does the answer come from? Where does the yes and the no come from? If it's always a no, it's just a reaction. It's not a true, full response from our total self, our whole self. So I think I would like to I think that we'll get that. Maybe we'll get into this a little later, but I think that pausing helps us to find that place from which we act authentically. And there's a couple of quotes. One is, it begins with Eric Fromm, who says that full freedom and independence exist only when the individual thinks, feels, and decides for himself, or I would add, or herself, themselves. He can do so authentically only when he or she has reached a productive relatedness to the world outside, which permits him or her to respond authentically. So there's a real way in which we're only independent when we're ourselves, when we are fully related. From who we are, I should say. And then he quotes Meister Eckhart, who was one of Ian's favorite authors, Dominican monk from the 14th century. And Meister Eckhart asks, what is my life? And his answer is that which is moved from within by itself. I think Aristotle will probably agree with that. That which is moved from without does not live. He says, if a man decides or receives anything from outside, it's wrong. I would kind of maybe disagree with Meister Eckhart there. We can receive from the outside, but we always need to check from, as Gene would say, from inside. That's always the criterion from which we can evaluate what carries our life forward and what doesn't. Meister Eckhart says we should not apprehend God or consider God outside oneself, but as our own and what is in ourselves. So, as some have said, God comes from within. And then he quotes Marx as saying something very similar to Meister Eckhart, but not in theological terms. He says, Marx said, a being does not regard, and here we have this gender problem, themselves as independent unless they are their own master. And they're only their own master when they owe their existence to themselves. A person who lives by the favor of another considers himself a dependent being. Now, we may have some interesting discussion about whether dependence is always a bad thing. I don't think so, but he goes on and says, I live completely by another's favor when I owe to them not only the continuance of my life, but also its creation, when he is its source. And my life is necessarily such a cause outside itself, but it's not my own creation. So what I was trying to get to with the breathing was sensing the aliveness from which we live, and we're not lived upon, but we live into the world and carry our life forward in the world. Now, I want to then go briefly to another thing that Marx said, which is a little on a slightly different direction, because he said that he critiqued the Constitution of 1791, which I believe was the French Revolution. And he says that the quote from the Constitution is, liberty is the power which belongs to humans to do anything that does not harm the rights of others. Liberty consists in being able to do anything that does not harm others. Marx comments, the limits within which each individual can move without harming others is determined by law, just as the boundary between two fields is determined by a stake. The liberty we are dealing with here is that of the human being as an isolated nomad withdrawn into him or herself. So he's saying that the bourgeois concept of freedom simply defines the other as the boundary where I can no pass, because at that point I'm infringing on the rights of others. Marx is pointing to the fact that freedom really involves being related and being in community, and not just seeing others as a boundary to my freedom. You are not just the place at which my freedom ends. On the contrary, my freedom really comes from being related. And here we get to that wonderful concept of genes, which is relating. And in relating, I'm authentically myself, and yet I am in a very alive and real way relating to you. I'm not just pouring out myself, I'm also in connection with. So independence here and living from yourself involves interdependence or connecting. And if we can have that notion, then we have a much more profound concept of both dependence and interdependence as both being an essential part of, I would say, living forward or being alive, or being that we realize our individuality in community. And there was a phrase that Marx had in one of the early manuscripts that talked about the communal individual. I once mentioned that to Gene, and he didn't say, I agree. He said, that's me. It was much stronger than I agree. He said, he identified completely with the concept of a communal individual. So that we have here both at the same time. An individual, the person we authentically are, our soul, our breath, our aliveness, and our being in community, because that's how we realize ourselves. It's not in some living in outer space somewhere without connection. I think that that might be enough, I think, to get us started. I'm curious to see what thoughts or reactions people have. I might say just to say that pausing seems so important here for us to be connecting both to ourselves and others. We come inside when we pause, but there's also this wonderful phrase from William Hernandez, listening through the pause. So in the silence of the pause, we are also open to listening. There's a listening that happens that isn't a technique. It's kind of just presence, being here fully with the other person and staying connected at the same time to our own self or authenticity. So that leads naturally to a deeper relating. I'm wanting to open it up now and see if people have any reactions to what I said, if it resonates, if there are questions, if it maybe seems not entirely right. I'd love to have feedback.
So I'm appreciating the dependence, independence, and interdependence. And somehow I feel like what's coming is like, like Jean sometimes does, puts all these words together with these slashes between them. It just kind of feeling the wholeness of all of that, like it's not like just a big yes to all three, like as human beings, we are dependent. And I loved it when you said that maybe dependence is not a bad thing. So there's like dependence and independence. There's definitely I think of 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds, watch me, or I can do it, I can do it, I can do it, and then interdependence. And so I'm just seeing that right now. This is a fresh thought. I had no idea what I was going to say, and it wasn't that, but I'm just feeling those three as a whole, as an interconnectedness. And the thing that I did want to put into the pot when I first raised my hand is I'm just really wondering how, in so much of the indigenous stuff that I read, it seems like this notion of responsibility is
Mhm.
huge, important, right? And then a term that I've been encountering that's really excited me, and some of the stuff that I've read, there's this Polish person, Karol Sultan, who is writing about what if the purpose of all of our institutions and all of our government was to support maturity in human beings,
Mhm.
right? And what is maturity? And
Mhm.
so those two notions of responsibility and maturity are
Mhm.
ones that I'm just really wanting to bring into this conversation.
Yeah, I think of maturity as being fully developed. And I like the distinction between responsive to and responsible for. Of course, when we have a child, we're responsible for to some degree. But as we mature, we become responsive to each other without taking responsibility for, letting the person have their own responsibility for themselves, but still having us be in a caring, connected, related responsiveness to. Yeah. It's really, to me, the idea of maturity is similar to the idea of fully, freely developed human beings. And Mark's saying that we need the full free development of every person is necessary for the free development of everybody. We can't leave anyone out.
I like that.
When we
I
leave someone out, it diminishes the whole.
I really responded to the part about the yes and the no.
Uh-huh.
And I remember this workshop 50 years ago or something, couples workshop, where the leader said, if you can't say if you can't say a definite no, you can't say a genuine yes. And I remember being so struck by that. And
And every
that
no is a kind of yes.
every no is a kind of yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. The old way of seeing the dichotomy between dependence and independence, you were kind of weaving in to our more new paradigm understanding of being interaction, and we're
Mm-hmm.
always both there. There is
Mm-hmm.
no independence. We can't live without other people,
Dependence, right?
right? And there's no dependence because our caretakers are dependent on us. I'm really experiencing that with the helpers that are taking care of my partner who is sick and needs care, and the relationship of these people. It's more like a family relationship, and it's so complex, the dependence and independence. So it's sort of interesting for me to hear you, Charles, separating them, saying they're, and I'm so used to saying, no, 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 you can't have one without the other. It's one unity. But the lived experience, as you pointed out, Rosa, the experience of independence, like, oh, I can share my screen by myself, which I can't yet, but I can do this or that by myself. Is so exciting.
You mean like a 2-year-old?
Yeah, right. And,
me.
right. And the experience of dependence and really being able to depend fully. I had an experience of being afraid of floating in the ocean and my partner just watching over me. And that feeling was so amazing to just float and be watched over. And so the experience of something may be very different than analyzing it and
yes. Floating, being supported, being watched over, cared about, protected in a good way. What is touching anyone else here? That's what matters, what's being touched.
So thank you so much. I really loved what you brought to us today. It's actually some of the kind of work I've been doing internally in this great year-long TAE. And what struck me is that our aliveness, just we in order to live, we have to breathe in what's out there, and we have to breathe out what's from within us. So that's just a very natural. But the word maturity is, how does that aliveness mature so we are communal individuals that carry something forward in our communities, in whatever community we're in. And it's like you said, Charles, it's that listening, that presence, that kind of listening that we are all so actively involved in, which is, it's passive and active at the same time. So there's all these paradoxes here that are the makings of evolving communities in a productive, creative way when we infuse our awareness and our mature presence in. And this whole thing just makes me, well, I don't know, I'm very emotional this time of my life anyway. Everything brings up a lot of emotion. But this possibility of this creative communal living that all individuals are a part of, and
creative communal living,
very moving to me. So
thank you.
Thank you.
I kind of like the word receptive rather than passive.
Yes, thank you. Receptive.
Breathing in is not passive, but it's a taking in, which is in its own way active and full and alive. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I love that what you were saying there. Are you complete, Maria?
Yes.
For now?
Yeah.
I'd like to invite Olivia to speak.
Thank you. I felt like there are many gems that you dropped, Charles, and others who contribute. I don't have a whole picture yet. I just feel some spark of some words, some connections start to pop.
I feel the sparks coming from you.
So maybe I'll start here. I was just journaling right before I came in. And I was reflecting on the sense of freedom that I realized I had an interaction with my father. It just clicked to me, almost like his life, he has been pursuing this freedom. In his environment, I just recognized how, like, with the limitations, with the constraint, he really created his life based on what he valued. And it's quite non-traditional. Like it's touching, right? Seeing it. He really valued being a father, being a great father. And in China, the male-female dynamic is usually like, oh, the female, my mom's supposed to be the more of the caretaking. My dad's supposed to like career or more money and that kind. But they kind of switch because my dad really wanted to do that, what he feels important. And then the other aspect is sometimes when my mom and I want to take care of him, like the way we show care, like culturally and I don't know, influenced by this like almost like controlling kind of, this is good for you. You should do this. And he will like protest, like, I want my freedom. So just in that like family dynamic and something clicked to me, that freedom he has been carrying so much. In a way, also it's how he relate to himself and people and the influence on him. There are certain things, the constraint, he doesn't have any problem breaking just by himself. But there is something I can tell, it's like psychologically mind belief that trapped him. That, yeah, so that's my reflection recently about the freedom, what is in my power, what is the constraint, the collective, how I want to navigate that. Yeah.
That's lovely. I love the way you're playing with that. The whole difference between being responsive to and responsible for. He doesn't want you to be responsible for him. Sometimes he probably enjoys you being responsive to him, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I recognize that pattern. I observe, like almost like I took in from how others interact. I stopped doing that years ago with my dad, and he responded really well.
Yeah. You heard him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Lovely. Let's see. Are you finished? Are you complete, Olivia?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm not sure how to pronounce your name. The person. How do we pronounce your name?
My name it's Megs, like eggs, legs, begs, kegs.
Megs.
There's just one of a dozen eggs, but just one Megs. In fact, I find it, especially since this is such an international.
The one and only Meg.
In fact, I am the only Megs Glidewell on Earth. So I realize if I'm arrested, it will be obvious. There's an advantage to be named John Smith, or I'm looking around Lynn Preston. How many Lynn Prestons are there in the world? Yeah. At least 20. So I wanted to say something, the quotes you were reading from so many different sources. I think in our culture, in Western culture, or at least in my experience and what I've read, so often independence is grabbing your own flag and you're marching alone up the hill, Excelsior, and we got on community. But I realized for one of the things I think most of us will recognize is one nice thing about independence is often, depending on what you're doing, writing, perhaps, or this is funny, small, but telling, cooking. If you're independent, knowledgeable, mature, confident of your own sensibility, you're, as the internet people say, you have your whole bandwidth is
Mm.
dedicated to yourself.
Your whole
And now,
bandwidth. It's
and when you think of, and I think of bandwidth, if you're insecure, scared, very dependent, so often a huge amount of your bandwidth is watching the soldiers, the parents, the people who are in some way a threat to you or controlling or must be satisfied. But then the other use of bandwidth that can be very independent and hugely helpful with focusing is to be tuning in to the people around you. Say if you're teaching a class, to be able to give part of your bandwidth to them, to constantly be aware, not judging yourself. Oh, that's it. Sometimes if bandwidth is dedicated to, am I satisfying them in a dependent way? Is not so good. But dedicating your bandwidth to, how is this going? Are we together? Is this helpful? Is a whole different way. So there's so many shades, of
relating.
paying attention.
Yeah.
And that's all I wanted to say.
Ah, that's wonderful. Having your full bandwidth as you relate to others, having your full mature self as you're present to and with those that you're connecting to. It's very nice.
Thank you for this chance. First of all, I need to say that my language is not so proper. So I take this responsibility, but still want to reflect myself. You mentioned about touching and being touched. And also listening. But I feel that being listened is so touching. In between touching and being touched, and also listening and being listened, there is something in the middle that is, I think, felt presence, sense of self. That is independence. And I feel when I say this, I feel like there is a champagne in my throat, chest and throat, but honey-like champagne. And
so
it
sweet,
goes
bubbly.
It goes true, but it stops there. It doesn't go out. Yeah, it's yeah, I know it's a little bit, funny, honey-like champagne, but this is how I feel. So
Feels very alive. Seems
sense
very
of
alive.
self. Yeah. So I just wanted to share this. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Hi, how are you, Charles? Thank you, Jasmine.
Okay.
I'm thinking and reflecting still on what Jasmine just said. I'll take it with me and reflect a little bit more. I almost feel like Olivia, like there were so many things that are sparking, and when you were talking about independence and interdependence, I was with you, and so many ideas were coming up. But then when you spoke about Solstein, and the quote that you gave, Charles, about what the purpose of institutions support maturity, I had such a reaction like in my heart, because I grew up during a time when I'm not saying that this hasn't changed, but institution can be pretty racist.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
They decide what maturity is, and if your culture to them is primitive and immature, they're going to not support your maturity. They're going to
That's
see
right.
you
Your own
as
sense of maturity, your own definition of maturity.
right. Exactly. So if maturity to me is interdependence and being
Mhm.
with my family, you know, and let's say spiritual traditions that may be considered different, that's not going to be seen as mature. And I was a therapist young during a time where everything that Latinos did was considered something to, you know, report to DSS or Department of Social Services, like their spiritual traditions. I think that institutions can't decide for us what maturity is.
That's right. That comes from us, right?
Yeah,
It
there was
needs to
a
come
sense
from
of
us.
pain when that quote came up. There was a sense of sorrow for me. Having witnessed and being part, having witnessed, you know, a lot of institutional abuse and having experienced that too, but then being part of institutions where I've seen, you know, abuses that I feel have been racial in terms of who gets what and how things are distorted to make a majority get and a minority not. So institutions, just the word institution was like, I've never had such a reaction. I think it was it was institution support maturity that kind of like did it for me in a way. That was all.
Well, I guess your experience with institutions was that it didn't support your own development, your own growth in your own terms of your culture.
I think that the how can I say, language is so interesting. It's that they did not support. I think that more than anything, they may have wanted me to take their view of what maturity is.
Right.
So they support it, but they support it by telling me, wait a minute, this is how it is.
By imposing, they supposedly support it by imposing.
Right.
Yeah.
I had a similar reaction
to
the word maturity, you know, that I've always, maturity, that word is a bad guy for me because it was like grow up, be mature. And mature always meant be the way the other person wants you to be and not your real self, your child self, your free self, your troublemaking self. Maturity always meant don't make any trouble for me. So it was lovely for me to kind of get a different glimpse of the word maturity, that maturity means coming into your own, and that feeling of recognizing your own like a flower that's mature and blossoming. And so I once had this very playful discussion with Gene where he was saying responsibility can be a bad word, and I was saying, you know, we were saying all of the words that we thought were bad words that we had some grudge against. And he ended with saying, is a bad word. That was very funny. But maturity has been a bad word. And now with you and Nessie, what you said, maturity can be a useful word.
Lynn, can I just respond to what you said? When you said what you said, it was like if my whole chest suddenly was relieved, like I had it holding. And when you said what you said, it was like, yes. And then what came up is that when you're young and someone imposes what maturity is, and it might be culturally different, you then become the other. You don't become yourself anymore. You then feel like I'm the mature one because I'm being taught by this institution to be mature. And now you're different than your family, because now you're kind of letting them know what mature is. Like it has so many ramifications, you know? And when
Right.
you said something else about maturity, when you said like to you, it was like, you know? And I have a friend who, there's a word for that in Spanish, which I can't right now remember, but she tells me that when she was young, if she was expressive, you know, Latinos can be very expressive, but you learn in this culture to be very appropriate and controlled in your words and in your being. You can't be yourself, right? So she would say whenever she was, you know, her Latina self expressive, she would be told to tone it down, you know, to tone it down. And so the institution support maturity has a lot of other ramifications that can go on. But thank you for sharing what you shared, Lynn, because it kind of opened up space in my heart. So
Lovely. That's independence, opening up space.
Yes, I'd just like to offer another word for maturity. And it came from doing a crossword puzzle the other day, and it's ripening.
Oh, nice.
That's all.
Ripening is a natural process of the, I'm thinking of Aristotle again, who talks about how the soul of a living thing is both the by which and the for which of the thing. The soul is what is that by which we mature or grow, and the soul is also that for which we develop. And so the soul here could be the fullness of the soul could be maturity in a more positive way.
Wow, I'm just breathing with all the passion. I had no idea I was introducing a charged word into the conversation. I love your by which and for which in the soul that you just said. And I love the word ripening. And I'm realizing, you know, words mean such different things in different contexts. What did Carl mean when he was writing this thing that ended up really inspiring me? And I think what he was saying is that what would our world look like? I don't know if some of you, you know, some of us here who've been around for a while, remember, you know, Maslow and the whole self-actualization. It's like, what if our political, and I know the word institutions has a lot of baggage, but what if our political forms were
social arrangements, maybe.
Social arrangements. Thank you. What if our social arrangements were dedicated to supporting human self-actualization? I don't like the word self-actualization because I really think
each one of us is an end in ourselves. We're each an end in ourselves.
Yeah, and we're interrelated, and
we're interrelated and supporting each other and
but
being
still,
an end.
Still, what if the purpose of society was to support that thing?
Yeah.
Growth, that development, that actualization, and so that's what Carl was getting at. That was exciting to me, to have an alternative to you know, the current establishment thinking tends to be so much more about, you know, maximizing the GNP, you know, it's like just looking at humans as consumers or you know, or even technologies of social control, right? Like our purpose is controlling people. And what if the purpose really was supporting growth? So that's I think where he was coming from, and what excites me so much about his thinking. And I do realize that, you know, any word can be loaded and can have political implications and be misused. So thank you. This is making me a lot more careful. Thanks.
Yeah,
I like fully developed.
But Rosa, where's Rosa? Oh, you disappeared, Rosa.
Rosa's right here.
Rosa, you were like on my left, and suddenly you were gone, right? Rosa,
she moved around.
You said that that you brought a loaded word, but I don't remember you bringing in a loaded word.
Maturity.
One who brought
Rosa, but it was you, Charles, who brought in the quote. No? Oh, okay.
Rosa brought in the word maturity.
Oh, Rosa, you shared that quote?
I don't know that I shared a quote, but I said that
No.
I was inspired
A
by
Polish thinker, you said.
Polish
Oh, I see. I thought Charles, I thought you brought a quote in by Solstein. It wasn't you?
I don't know who Solstein is.
Oh, I see. Okay, so it was Rosa who brought it. I'm sorry, Rosa.
Yeah, that's
I
okay.
thought it was in the discussion with Charles, but it was something that you shared. I got it. Okay.
Yeah. But it's great because we're getting clarity about
Yeah,
what we
I had so
need.
many sparks. I took that in
Yeah,
and I
and
thought
that's great.
Charles.
You spoke up and
Yeah.
you said, no, that word has so many associations of repression and suppression for me, of grow up and be mature, as opposed to maturity being fully ourselves. So I think is what
Yeah.
Rosa means by it.
Yeah. And what Rosa said reminded me, I like when you said, I don't like the word actualization, self-actualization, but everything that you said afterwards reminds me of Richard Short's An Internal Family System, who says,
Right,
we all have basic goodness. And in
right.
his theory, he calls it, self with a big S.
Self, right.
And to make it easy, he says, and the self is consists of 8 C's, creativity, connectedness, courage, compassion, clarity. And he goes on, and then you can expand on those 8 C's, but it's like in Buddhism, they say we all have basic goodness, and we meditate to sit, to connect to all that wisdom within us. And if society could support that wisdom within us, then, that's like what I heard you say, I could be wrong. You didn't want to use the word self-actualization, but I heard you kind of really say a lot of what Richard Short says in terms of self-energy and that self-leadership within us.
Yeah, so if I may, I'm really resonating with what you're saying. It's like, what if society were designed to support the ripening of basic goodness within each human being?
Yes, yes.
Oh, that's nice.
Mm.
Ripening of basic goodness. Hmm. Are we ready to break into groups? Is
It
this a good
seems like
time?
it's time.
Or is there
yes.
one more person want to say something before we do?
Yeah, I can't find the raise the self button. I just want to say you're inspiring me, talking about the word and different interpretations. I'm sure everybody has seen on the internet, you're searching and you get those word trees where there's the word you're looking at in the middle. And then there's this explosion, almost like a firework, of all the related words and how closely they're related linguistically. I love those things.
Welcome back, everybody. We're so curious to see what happened in your groups and what you want to share.
Yeah, whatever you'd like to share about what came.
Well, one of the things that came up in our group, especially towards the end, is we agreed the 3 of us felt you never mature. It's a train that it continues through life, if you're lucky. Oh, we didn't have the lucky, but it's an ongoing.
It's not a finish. It's never a finished process. It's never a finished process.
Like focusing. You keep
Yeah.
growing new antenna if things are going well.
Yeah.
And I think even when we die, what we do lives on in others.
So something we talked about in our group was freedom itself as a story that's very context dependent. And so me saying I'm free or not free, it's already a certain perception of a situation. And again, it can be very different in different contexts. And one thing I thought also with this whole dependence, interdependence, or dependence or independence, I'm thinking like as a teenager, we feel like freer or want to be freer from our parents, but it really just shifts our dependence on other contexts like school or friends or or whatever group we are part of. So it seems like more freedom, but from another perspective, it could even be less freedom, or the same being dependent on something. So, and then I was talking for myself, because I can very easily get into the story of being stuck, and then just noticing all the things or all the ways I'm not stuck, and how that opens up.
I'm reminded of a story about Emerson and Thoreau. Thoreau was in prison because he refused to support the Mexican War. And Thoreau visited him and said, "What are you doing there in jail?" And he said, "What are you doing out there, not in jail?" And who was freer, Thoreau or Emerson? The one in jail or the one not in jail? You see, it's complicated, isn't it? Martin Luther King going to jail for his beliefs was free, I think, because he was acting from his autonomy, from his beliefs, from his values. And when he's connected to that, he was freer than he would have been not being in jail. So you're right, it's the context changes. And each time, and I think the idea of not being finished is also very important. It's an ongoing process. It's not it's not finished.
I think we can get caught up in the isness of, is someone free or not free, rather than the experience. And even the experience is so complex that I can feel free in one moment, and the next moment I can feel constrained.
And sometimes we're constrained externally, and sometimes we're constrained internally.
And there isn't really a difference between internal and external, because the external is internal and the internal is external.
Well, externally, Martin Luther King could be in a jail, but internally he could be free, right? So this,
right.
Yeah.
Right.
I'd like to share something here. And I'd so very much like that these were not recorded, but then I know it is. So I'm just going to share my vulnerability here. And talking about how we are, this conversation that has been so rich, and it has triggered so much in me. And for various reasons, because we are speaking about dependence, interdependence, being independent or dependent. And to me, what came was the word being affected, affecting and being affected.
Interaffecting,
and interaffecting, yes. And maturity, and how we are, when are we mature? And I realized that I was very much triggered by something that was mentioned at the beginning. And I realized there was this very child sensitive left out part in me, because and then again, I know, and I know that when it was said as something, as a fact. But at the beginning, you said, Charles, because we are celebrating tomorrow our Independence Day.
Oh, true. I'm sorry. I apologize. I apologize. Those who identified. Yes, thank you. Thank you for
but then it's not about apologize, but about your apologizing, because I know your intention was different. What I mean here is that how this conversation got to me, went to that dimension of affecting and being affected more than depending or not depending. And because in me, that inner left out child was triggered again, was, I'm being left out here, and I'm
not included in this.
Exactly. And I know that was not the intention at all, but it's how much we can be affected, and we are affecting each other in these different ways.
Thanks for speaking up.
I want to follow up what Natty just said. 30, 40 years ago, I heard there's something going on in the Mideast where Americans had shown up at the embassy, standing on the street looking for directions from the American embassy of what they should do. And the newscaster describing the scene says, Americans and their wives.
Like the wives are not Americans, just the husbands.
And it's like the men loaded the covered wagons and moved from the east coast of America to the Great Plains, as though everybody else just hopped on. So that accidental, odd exclusionary, that Americans and their wives.
Yeah, and I just want to jump in because I missed the beginning when Charles said that. So now hearing it, I'm feeling very triggered myself because I'm here and I'm not celebrating that. And I don't feel celebratory about it. As I spoke to Charles in the breakout group, I'm on the phone with my daughter who has a trans partner, lives in San Francisco. I'm so glad she's there. That she said there are states she doesn't feel comfortable being in that aren't safe for her, that she doesn't feel free. And so, and with the ruling and things like that. So I'm just sharing that, I don't feel celebratory about it myself. So the royal we is kind of interesting.
Yeah, it was in the context of introducing the topic of independence, which I think Lynn suggested that we choose this topic because of Independence Day. But but I realize, thank you for beautiful.
But that's part of the conversation, Charles.
Of course.
Part of the
exactly.
Yeah.
Mistakes, I could call it a mistake, perhaps, is great because it provides all these opportunities for bringing stuff up.
I want to throw a focusing note. One of the great pleasures of focusing is the felt sense might sometimes raise a curtain on a black stage, but it never lies to me. It's always reeking of special kind of the light of illumination of that way to whatever.
You're saying that always speaks the truth in some sense.
It has, as far as I can tell, I don't think the felt sense could lie.
I don't think so. Could be mistaken, but not lie. I think it could be mistaken, perhaps.
Yeah, like those great moments of intuition on you just invented the engine of infinite power and it was good for 30 seconds.
I just want to say, Charles, I hope you don't feel wrong in any which way because it's just part of the conversation. And I'm so grateful for this conversation. And it's just bringing up very deep issues about these feelings of freedom.
No, I think it was good because it opened up a chance for you to share your feelings. That's fine. I love it. No problem.
I think whenever we're reminded of the importance of inclusion and that this is not a United States group. We're an international group. And I think the majority always has to be reminded, or at least ways in which I'm in the majority, I always have to be reminded. And then there's a freedom in that. Oh, yes.
Right. Opens up my world.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to say that, even for people here in the US, freedom, for many of us, freedom is a charged word, right? And I also want to just celebrate that for 50 years now, people have been gathering in the middle of the public lands in the National Forest on the 4th to celebrate interdependence specifically. So interdependence and interaffecting. I want to celebrate the word interaffecting that got brought up. And I also want to celebrate what Lynn brought up a couple of different times about how the word is gets us into trouble, right? So instead of maturity, it's like someone brought out from a small group this thing of that we are continuously maturing and growing new antenna. And I just love that image, and that will be staying with me. So those are some of the things that I am celebrating now and will be celebrating tomorrow, or interaffecting, interdependent.
So we're not supporting a finished process. We're supporting a process, an ongoing developing process. And if that became central in all our social arrangements to support that, it would be such a radical revolutionary shift from one where people are used as means to accumulate wealth or whatever, right? Where the person is an end, not a means.
Mm.
Yeah.
A continually developing end.
A continually developing end.
Oh, I think we're going to do your poem.
I suggested a poem. I
Yeah.
always like said Dorothy's choices, but I like this one because
No,
it speaks to
yeah,
it speaks to how we're all connected.
Right, right.
yeah, we're doing Charles's poem. Thank you. I love the flow of what happened in the conversation today, and I think this poem lends itself to. By Walt Whitman. I saw in Louisiana a live oak growing. I saw in Louisiana a live oak growing. All alone stood it, and the moss hung down from the branches. Without any companion, it grew there, uttering joyous leaves of dark green. And its look, rude, unbending, lusty, made me think of myself. But I wondered how it could utter joyous leaves standing alone there without its friend near. For I knew I could not. And I broke off a twig with a certain number of leaves upon it and twined it a little moss, and twined around it a little moss, and brought it away. And I have placed it in sight in my room. It is not needed to remind me as of my own dear friends, for I believe lately I think of little else than of them. Yet it remains to me a curious token, yet it remains to me a curious token. It makes me think of manly love. For all that, and though the live oak glistens there in Louisiana, solitary in a wide flat space, uttering joyous leaves all its life, without a friend, a lover near, I know very well I could not. I'll put it in the chat because it feels like this is a poem you might want to read again. There's so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for reading that.